Well, so as those the doorbells of people joining start to slow down, so this is our Entuity Tech Talk. If you guys have been before, these are you'll know that these are kind of informal by design, right? There's not a bunch of slideware. Nobody nobody from sales is here, right? We're just trying to spread some awareness about interesting topics. And hopefully we've cleared the bar today for ourselves and you guys that it is technical enough and has some value. And so if you have questions, use the Q&A function as we go. My name's Jordan McPherson. I'm the Director of Product. I oversee Entuity software. And so I will be, keeping time and so if you have questions and I'll interrupt these guys and get them to answer or answer myself, right? So let them fly throughout. We'll do a couple of polls throughout just to sort of get a feel for how you guys are doing things today or what lines up with the talk. And so, just a little bit of inside baseball. When we think about these talks, it's for us, the bar is, do we have something worth talking about, right? And do we think it's going to be enough, value to you guys as users to want to hear that, right? So it's not the regular, scheduled demo stuff for prospects. This is meant to be, how do we use Entuity to solve, a business challenge or technical problem within our org, right? And kind of get better. And so joining me today from our solution architect group are both Pete Bartz and John Diamond. Some of you guys might have worked with them in the past or maybe even when you were deploying Entuity, right? So they are both been around the product for a long time and both as a user, Pete, and now part of Entuity for a while now, and JD in a couple of different roles. I think I learned of a different function he served for Entuity all the time. So, so for today, we want to talk about dashboards. When we were thinking about it in the last year, we've spent a lot of time on user-defined polling and custom integrations, third-party integrations using webhooks, right? And so how do we get like more, better, richer data into Entuity, right? Things that maybe we wouldn't have thought about in the past or whatever else, right? And that's great. We've got it in Entuity. I know there's kind of this like, we've got all this data, now what, right? And so there's really this question of, how do you use that data to tell a story beyond just, eventing or whatever else. And so I'm going to launch a poll. And really what I'm trying to capture here, it should be a multi-select, is, when you guys are using Entuity dashboards today, what are you using them to do, right? So is it, communicating status or availability to like leadership or business groups, right? So, hey boss, the network's up really well. I have an MBO tied to that, or look at what a great job I'm doing, right? Or is it more of a operations view, something like a service team or a NOC maybe is primarily using it. Is it a troubleshooting thing, right? Hey, we've got a ticket or somebody reported a problem. Let me go, drill in and take a look at what's going on. Or maybe something else, right? If it's other, go ahead and put it in the chat, what the other might be. I think that really fits in. When we think about the out-of-the-box Entuity dashboards, we've really built those to, one, show as much data about the devices that are monitored as possible, and two, to catch sort of the minimum, everybody likes to know these sorts of things, right? Which most businesses aren't really the same. Most teams aren't the same, right? So they're really not meant to be exhaustive or always the right answer, which is why we've spent a lot of time making these customizable and configurable, right? And so when we talk about dashboards, we get into this kind of chicken and the egg problem of so I've gathered this data, and really when I was setting up monitoring, I was focused on eventing, right? I want incidents so that I can respond and go fix something, right? And then we get to dashboards, and it's real easy to just sort of, here's everything I monitored for faults, put it in a dashboard, right? But what can happen there is you get into kind of this dashboard fatigue, right? You've got this big scroll of all these metrics or statuses, and it somebody looks at it and they're like, okay, well, what am I looking at, right? Or what's this tell me, or why do I care? And so then they kind of lose value, they lose interest, or don't want to look at it, or whatever else, right? And so we have to make sure we have the right data there for what we're trying to do from a monitoring perspective, so that it can show up in the dashboards. And so that can be an interesting thought, right? We've used the word in the past, like monitor what matters, right? Because that's what's going to end up on dashboards, right? It can be really easy to turn everything on and it's all interesting, and so it goes on a dashboard, right? And so then I'm going to spend my entire poll budget here in the front end of the meeting, and I'll launch another one. And so what this one is about is really trying to gauge where the group's at, right? So, are you using dashboards just, the out of the box suits your needs, or you haven't gone into customization yet, right? Maybe you've customized the out of the box views to add additional information, right? Or, full on, I need a new dashboard to solve some problem, right? And so just circling back to the last poll, looks like most everybody is using for operations views, right? And so 52%, right? So I would expect that to be pretty common for Entuity. And then 29% for troubleshooting. Great, that makes sense. We have a lot of good dashboards for that, but only 14% for communicating to the business. So hopefully we can have some converts today, right? Into using Entuity to communicate back to the business. So that's great. So on that front, so I've got Pete and JD here with me, so I get to shut up real soon and let smart people talk. We're going to go through some of the newer features with dashboards that might have been launched maybe since you've had a demo or whatever else. I am going to tease out. So we've had a pretty significant amount of feedback from users around this need for, I've got a kiosk, or I've got a, monitor in my, near my network operations area, or, my boss just cannot log in and navigate, right? I just want to send them a direct link, and there's the dashboard, right? So just a few short weeks, latest patch will be released, and in there we've included a feature that will do a token-based login, right? So you'll be able to do those public dashboards. So they'll be accessible for kiosks and knock views, and maybe people that don't need access to all of Entuity, right? Hopefully to make life a little simpler for everyone. So go ahead and respond to those polls if you just threw out. Looks like we got a pretty good response rate. It also looks like a lot of folks in this meeting have done some new dashboards before, so hopefully we'll have some tips and tricks here today to take you on to the next level. So, Pete, I know you do a lot of these back from when you were a user, and now in your role as a solution architect. and there's always that, seems to be a common one that comes up a lot, that you were going to tell us about today, right? The what's in Entuity kind of question. You're on mute, Pete. There you go.
Yep. Yeah. So the question, as you mentioned earlier, the question of, you go through the onboarding, you start looking at what you're monitoring, but the question is, what have I got? And that story really comes across, differently depending upon different folks that need to be able to look at it. So my goal today is to just share a number of dashboards. These are things that we've delivered. I work with customers, certainly have pushed these types of dashboards, help customers actually develop these, but really they're intended to tell a story about what you've got. So let's take a look at the first one. Again, this is just a simple dashboard that leverages a table, but also looks at the types of devices that I've got. So I've got a list of devices in a table. I could rename this to devices or whatever I'd like. But I've got information about devices in a tabular form. That's really easy to implement. A lot of customers have done that already. But the nice part about this one is I can roll that information up and break it out by different types of attributes. So I can look at the types of devices. How many firewalls do I have? How many routers do I have? Go down the line. Again, these are done automatically based on what the devices are and what's being modeled. By manufacturer, same type of thing. How many Dell devices do I have? How many Cisco devices do I have? Go all the way down this. Devices by model, same type of thing. Again, this story is really just intended to tell me about type of devices and what I've got. And then from there, if I need to be able to export this out, just like any other table, just export the data. So, this would be, I think, a comparison to some of the existing reports that are in the system. But from a UI perspective, it's really easy to get that picture. I just, a variant of that, if I look at it, instead of, looking at manufacturers, I'll just quickly drill into models and types and look at versions. So when I'm looking specifically in that Cisco realm, and I want to be able to say how many different version, 12.2, these are old 3550s, I believe, that we've got. But how many of these devices do I have? Now, if I want to get more information about that, notice the color coding on this. I can actually just break this out and show me a list. Here's the devices that are running that version. So you can use the dashboards in the pie chart style for visibility, but you can also leverage those to kind of narrow down and drill into various components by type. Just another example that I've used, leveraging certification. When you look at asset management and you're onboarding devices, understanding what devices are certified and what devices may not be certified is something that you can do from the asset management pages. But this is just a kind of an admin level. I would say your administrators probably would have access to something like this, but to get an idea again of what have I got, what are the list of devices that I'm managing, do I have things that are not certified, things that I need to look at certification for, leveraging Entuity support. One more example that we'll look at is we'll look at this one. This is, gets into pretty small pie charts, but that's okay. I'm looking at the classic stuff again, but I've added into this a custom attribute. So I've added an attribute into the system. It's actually looking at STIGs categories. So these are official STIGs categories that are defined by DISA, but I've applied these to devices. In a lot of cases, I don't actually have them applied. But this is, again, just a way to leverage something that is beyond kind of out-of-the-box monitoring into a custom attribute and add that into a dashboard that makes it more visible as well. So I've got a firewall, I've got a server, I've got some devices that aren't set, and I've got a bunch of devices that don't have the STIGs category set on them at all. But I can leverage this as a method for either reporting or just visualization. I'm hoping this gives some ideas on how to find different ways to look at what you've got. I think, Jordan, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, that's great. I think we're all looking for that source of truth when it comes to the simple question of what do I have on my network. So this is a really helpful way to take this data and be able to look through it, especially if there isn't, another inventory tool or source of truth there, right? So this is really a good one. And so this is kind of taking the metadata of things we already have and bringing it together in a joined up way. What about JD? I know that we have times where operationally a team cares differently about what data should be highlighted or brought up first, right? So um, how might somebody go about doing that, right? So they can use the dashboards more quickly for either operational views or troubleshoot work.
Yep, definitely. And in fact, this example I'm about to show you came from one of my customers who were focused on monitoring NetApp storage devices. Now, we support a number of different storage devices, many different vendors, several models within certain vendors like Dell EMC. There's a whole range of different models and families of support for different of their storage devices. We provide one out-of-the-box summary dashboard. Now, if I were to go and take a quick look at all of my devices that I've got under management here, and I'm just going to filter it down to the storage store. And these are a couple of Dell EMC VNX storage units and a NetApp. Now, if I were to take a look at this, I know it's offline, but it doesn't really matter. So here's the Dell VNX unit, and this is what the standard summary dashboard for storage device looks like. And you'll notice it's got a list of the physical disk drives that exist within the unit. Now, that may be very appropriate for some users, but if I were to go back and we'll take a look at that NetApp, the customer I worked with really wasn't very interested in the physical disk drives. They wanted to see the storage volumes. Now, we took the standard summary dashboard for storage devices and have modified it so that it can leverage the vendor or the manufacturer to make a decision as to which storage summary dashboard to show you. So this is actually a different summary dashboard. They're both called summary, but this one is showing if this is NetApp as the manufacturer. We've replaced the volume, the physical disk dashlet here with a table that shows the volumes. Now, the couple of things that are worth noting. First of all, if I were to go in and actually show you by editing this dashboard how that decision was made as to which dashboard to show. This dashboard, if I go to the advanced settings, has a filter. So we're applying a filter. We've added a filter, and it's looking at the manufacturer attribute and saying the manufacturer has to equal NetApp in order for this dashboard to be displayed. If it were a storage device, but it wasn't a NetApp, then this doesn't qualify, and this dashboard would not be shown, and it will default back to the default storage dashboard that showed you the physical disk drives. So that's a very important aspect, that dashboard level filter. Now, when it comes to the volumes, that table, if I were to go in and take a look here, you're going to see that I've said that I want the hardware volumes, and that is going to be derived from whichever hardware volumes belong to the currently selected unit. So this is a dynamic dashboard that is taking whatever the context in the Explorer is to identify the unit that we want to focus on, and it's showing you the volumes that belong to that unit. I've added a bunch of attributes down here, but importantly, in the advanced settings, I've got two advanced settings in here. One of them is the sort order. If you look here, the provisioned used percent, I wanted that one in descending order so that it shows the volumes that are the most full at the top. In addition to that, NetApp has a strange aspect that many of the storage volumes are snapshot volumes that really aren't of interest to most of the users. They have .snapshot in their name. So down here, I've put an additional filter on the table that says the name, if it contains the string .snapshot, then because I've inverted the filter, that will cause it to be hidden. So if a volume name contains .snapshot, you will not see it. It filters them out because they're really not of any interest. So with that done, that was how that volume table was set up. And so you can leverage those filters and the default sort order to achieve that display down here. Okay, Jordan, back to you.
So JD, just to hammer down on a couple things you said there. So we can have the context menu, right? So the breadcrumbs, right? What kind of app you're in, drive, which version of a dashboard comes in, right? So that's
absolutely that's a very important concept. So you, this is an example with storage devices. I have another customer who has a number of different manufacturers of firewall, and they wanted to show subtly different dashboards for different types of firewall, and this would allow you to do it. You could say if it's this manufacturer or even a different version of firewall from the same manufacturer, you could create a subtly different dashboard for it
based upon what matters for that version or whatever else, right? I know with storage, it's always I probably already always drive storage admins nuts because for me, I just always say LUN, right? And depending on the manufacturer, it's a volume group, it's a all these different things, right? But
that's right. Some equipment you might be more focused on LUNs, some you might be more focused on volumes, and so that distinction matters. And this is how we can help and make that much easier at runtime.
Well, and then this also helps with the I've got 50 dashboards always showing up on the right, the right navigation menu, right? So I'm getting the proper dashboards if and when I need them, right? As opposed to always, right? Hopefully avoid the empty dashboard or non-applicables, right? That kind of stuff.
That's right. And in this particular case, I've got two different storage dashboards, both called summary, and it will pick the one that is appropriate based upon the vendor that you're looking at.
Right. And if I were to create a whole new dashboard that I only wanted to apply to NetApps that wasn't summary, right? By being able to scope that when I'm looking at, a server or a network device, that dashboard wouldn't even, be
That's
available, right?
It would be completely missing from the menus if you were not looking at a NetApp.
Perfect. Great. No, that's awesome. And it is interesting, when you get from, kind of the tools team to the, to the actual infrastructure owner, to the kind of the end user, right? Where they start to want to see, what matters to them in these dashboards, right? From a troubleshooting standpoint. So definitely understand the need there.
One quick thing I just would like to point out, in the dashboard configuration tool, this is that dashboard I created for NetApp. And you will notice that there is a column called filtered. And this is showing yes. Most of the others are showing no. There's another one on this VMware dashboard because in a very similar way, at the moment, we have extra information available for VMware that isn't being monitored for Hyper-V, and other virtualization platforms. And so we have an enhanced dashboard in the VMware world. And so this one is filtered to only show you the VM platform dashboard here for VMware, if it is a VMware system you're looking at. If it's something else, it will default back to the other one in a very similar way to what I've just shown you with NetApp.
You know, and so you open this up, and I'm glad you did. I'm going to take us off script because that's the point here. You know, we've also got this group access column I see on this page here, right? And I think this is another you know, really powerful feature when we're talking about you know, scoping dashboards and how we you know, use them to tell stories, right? So, you know, a lot of people might think of this in the vein of like a role-based access, right? So where we want to have maybe a group that's called, you know, the network team, right? And so they've got different dashboards than you know, the server team, or there could be application teams or location driven. Talk a little bit about that, if you will, JD. Hopefully I didn't steal too much of that with my opining there.
Absolutely. I mean, going back to what you were saying earlier, if you have too many dashboards available, it can become confusing. There are occasions where, particularly for a group of users who have a very defined role, where only a handful or even fewer dashboards are relevant, it might be better not to provide them access to all of the dashboards and limit this down to only providing the ones to simplify their life without extraneous distractions. And this is a way that you can control which groups of users have access to which dashboards, so you can apply that fine tuning to sharpen up the user interface to be more specific for different user communities.
I can definitely think of a handful of bosses I've had in my life where I wanted to have them have less dashboards, right? So
yes, senior executives, you may not want to show them everything.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, hey, thanks so much for taking us through that. I think that's pretty common use case, right? Where, you know, the default has the data, but it doesn't give it to you in exactly the right way, you know, or what your operations team is looking for, right? So how do we tune that, right? So I think that you know, if we look at the kind of the poll data, you know, we do see that a lot of folks have customized the out of the box dashboards, right? Hopefully doing something similar. And hopefully that was helpful. You know, so Pete, I think another challenge we see is there's a lot of different network devices out there, right? That can be monitored from Entuity, and but sometimes we're not great at it, right? Out of the box, and so, you know, we're aware of that, and so we've, you know, we've done some time on these user-defined pollers, whether it's REST or SNMP, right?
Yep.
And empowering, you know, tools teams and NetOps teams to extend through. But again, you know, from earlier, right? I've got this data. Now what, right?
Yeah, I mean,
maybe take us through this example.
yeah, I mean, the idea is we collect a lot of data from a lot of different devices, but there's always going to be something out there. There's a couple cases, and this is actually one of the environments that we've got at Park Place as well. But this is looking at things like environmentals, you know, whether it's UPS, or in this case, this is total power distribution, you know, air conditioning, temperature, power, these types of things. So, you know, in the Entuity system, we added additional metrics to be able to cover these things. And again, leveraging SNMP as a method to do that via user-defined polling, or using the API methods to do the same thing. In this case, we actually added a bunch of power information. And this is more of a tactical operational dashboard, but it's just looking at power, it's looking at usage, it's looking at amp usage and generating events and things like that. But I want to be a little more creative, because the story I want to tell is something that, you know, maybe a little bit more graphical. But I want to focus on something like power or actual temperature. You know, we've got top of cabinet, top of row methods to be able to look at temperature in each data center cabinet. So we're certainly labeling these to be able to identify the row in the data center and which cab they're in, but the ability to very quickly see temp is something you can leverage a dashboard for. Now, this is an interesting one because this is not using a fixed kind of panel for the dashboard. It's actually a scrolling method, because I've certainly got more things that I want to be able to display than I can fit in a page. So this is using a scrolling method, and it's actually just using a meter gauge, which is something that the standard out-of-the-box dashboards, there's not a lot of cases where we've added that in, so customers might not know about this. But the ability to actually look at an attribute and look at something like temperature, put a gauge against it, identify a threshold, that's where you see the red bar. I'll give you an idea of what it looks like. So you can see here that this is a scrolling style dashboard. So we've set up different columns. So we've got individual sections and 6 sections across this left to right. But each one of these dashlets is then set up to monitor a specific object and pick out the temperature sensor. So the interesting part about this is very, this is pretty standard stuff to be able to look at, pick the object and device that you want to be able to focus on. But the interesting part about this is we're leveraging a gauge. So the gauge is going to look at the temperature value. And in here, I've actually got the ability to set the min and max methods for the gauge. I've set this to, go as high as 200 degrees. It's pretty high. But I'm rendering it as a dial style, and I'm adding some text onto it. Now, the interesting part too is I've added in a defined threshold. So I've actually set the threshold definition at a percentage of the maximum, so a percentage of 200. So I'm doing this at the dashboard level. This isn't engaging an alert of any sort. This is actually for visualization. But I'm setting colors, I'm setting this effectively. And then from that, if I just preview this one, all of these different gauges are going to pick up that data, automatically refresh, but again, visually see kind of in a meter form in that dial style to be able to see what's going on. So that's just one example. Kind of another way to leverage some of that same data. Again, this is all custom data. These are just leveraging attributes that are added into the system. Out-of-the-box attributes can leverage the same type of methods as well. But this is just using a vertical, vertical gauge right here. So I'm just doing a bar chart type thing. So I'm putting a threshold, same threshold on here, identifying where I've got percentage of used amps. So if I hit the maximum amp load, again, this is a scrolling style. So just a little bit different way to look at this. Let's look at another example. I'm going to move it out of the kind of the large scale data center into cases where you've got distributed UPSs, APC UPSs all over the environment. I've got a number of these that are being modeled. I'm picking up specific metrics. Again, I'm using user-defined polling to collect that information. And I built a dashboard that says, just show me all my UPSs. And I want to pick which one I want to look at some data for. So just a dynamic dashboard to pick up and pull some chart-based information. Looking at load, looking at temperature, certainly runtime and battery capacity are things that you'd want to pay attention to. So this is kind of a high-level look. If I took a look at, the one of the APCs that I've got being modeled, I wanted to look at what JD did on the storage side, because I've got this additional data added to the system, but I'd like the summary dashboard to be configured in a fashion where it's unique to that type of device. So I'm going to modify the summary to be able to pick up, UPS related metrics. Again, here I've got a different gauge style to be able to pick up. One thing to note with the gauges, when you set these up, you can actually put multiple gauges in a dashlet, and they'll actually assemble themselves like side by side all the way across a dashlet definition or a dashlet size. So if I made this dashlet bigger, I could put multiple gauges. You don't have to have one gauge per dashlet if you don't want to, similar to what you saw in the earlier panel. But this is just showing some custom metrics. Again, I've modified this to pick up metrics that are specific to this type of an APC. So when I look at that device and go to the summary, it's going to actually show this. Now, I was building this sort of in alignment with when JD was talking. So there's one panel here that I've got some real estate open. And what I'd like to be able to do, the one thing that I was missing was some voltage information. So inbound, outbound voltage. You actually see it here where I've got inbound, outbound voltage as a chart. I'm actually going to show you how to add that in. So there's actually a kind of a unique trick, call it a trick, but it's something where when you're building dashboards, you can set up these charts one of a couple different ways. I can add a chart just like I would normally and pick the metrics. So I can build a dashlet from scratch and do it as a chart style. Or if I've got a chart in another dashboard, say this one right here, I'm just in the normal viewing mode, but I'm just going to drag this dashboard up into my other browser tab and drop it down in the editor. It's going to resize itself. So I'm going to leverage this definition as part of this dashboard. Now, with this one, if I go back to this original one, this is a view-based dashboard. So this chart is based on a selection that I'm picking in this table. Now, in this case, I've already got my context set, so this isn't going to work. I'm just going to modify it. So you can see that I'm using a dashlet as a source. I'm just going to modify this, select it back to the dashboard. And based on that, just a dashboard source where it's going to pick up your context, it's going to maintain all of the chart settings that I've got. So I didn't have to pick and choose, just makes it easier. And I'm going to preview it. So, just a trick on how to actually, you could create these charts manually, but more effectively, just drag them from one other dashboard and put them in, especially if they're a dashboard template style chart. And you can modify the individual components of the dashlet as well. I'll just show you one more example. This is the power distribution that I was referring to is really user-defined S&P polling. But this device is actually using an API method to connect to, and we've used this in other tech talks as well, but to go to openweathermap.org, pick up the temperature for a specific city. This happens to be a device that we're managing. We just called it Mayfield Heights, and we're picking up temperature. But this is just another example of what charts can look like, again, to tell you that story about a specific scenario, but just a different way to visualize. This can be really handy as well. It's built the same way, but it's using the REST API methods.
Well, and Pete, I think this is a good illustration of why it can be so hard to answer the question of can Entuity monitor that? Because the answer's
pretty much yes.
Usually yes. It's just a matter of the important question is how, right? Not can. So no, these are really cool. I know we've had some a lot of ESG and data center infrastructure discussions going on right around temperature and power draw and things like that. So this is all really expanding the scope of what could be pulled into Entuity and leveraged and used, right? And not just I need alerts if we're on battery, right? But actually getting into additional data from there. It looks like this is this group doesn't have a ton of ESG happening now, but good to know. And I think this, to your point with the weather, this would apply to kind of anything, right? This is just our the example we have in the lab right now, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, great. So I think the at the beginning I asked who's using this for business users or who's using it for operations views. And I think we've done a good job walking through some different use cases there. But a lot of these are not going to be that helpful when I'm troubleshooting, right? I've got an active issue. Polling only happens so frequently, and whether it's microbursts on a network or CPU usage, trying to catch when it's high versus low. It can be kind of frustrating. JD, do we have anything for that? Oh, that was a terrible setup. I'm sorry, guys. Go ahead.
Okay, well, what I am in a position to show you is how you can actually leverage our high-speed poller. That's known as Ticker. Hopefully, most, if not all of you, are aware of Ticker. And let me just give you a standard little demo. So if I were to go find a device, let's say I'm going to go for a device down here. I could go find a port on this device. Let's say that port, right click, and you got a ticker option here to go pick one or multiple attributes that you're going to poll rapidly, and that means on a 1 second basis. By default, you can poll more slowly, but this will, after a few seconds, initialize and start polling the utilization. So it's going to take the traffic and factor that into the line speed and show you that interactively. So you see that data appearing. Here it goes. Data samples are starting to come in and you can use it. However, this doesn't have to be manually configured like that. You can incorporate one or multiple ticker charts into a dashboard. Now, normally, when we put a chart in a dashboard, it's pulling data from the database to show you in the chart. A ticker chart is different because a ticker chart gathers its data in real time from a device. It doesn't put it in the database, it just uses it for charting purposes. Now, if I were to go back, I've created a dashboard. This one will operate at a view level. I could have had it so that it operated at a device or even a port level. But here I'm going to have a dashboard. I called it Ports with Ticker. And it has built a list of all of the ports within the selected view. This one had 1,408 ports. A table within our dashboards will automatically cap at 1,000 entries. So this is showing you the first 1,000 according to the default sort order, which was putting the port with the highest inbound utilization over the period of the dashboard is set to operate in at the top. If I wanted to choose the remaining ports, I could just select them over here. Now, what this has also done is it's enabled me to link up a couple of other charts. I've got one ticker chart focused on utilization, the other one on faults. If I were to pick an entry down here, let's go pick this one here. I'm just going to select it, and these ticker charts are wired to this dashlet on the left, which means when I select an entry in the table on the left, it then allows the charts on the right to know what it is that they're supposed to be showing you data on. And they are now initializing Ticker to show you inbound and outbound utilization on the top. And if there were any faults, then you would see them down the bottom here. So it did take a few seconds, somewhere around 20 to 30 seconds in this case, to do that initialization, but you weren't having to pull stuff off a menu. You were just selecting whichever port you were interested in. If down here, for example, I see that we've got some outbound faults on this port, if I go and select it, it will then reinitialize those ticker charts on the right, so that we'll then get both utilization and fault showing up within a few seconds. It'll initialize Ticker to start pulling that data in. So the difference between Ticker and regular polling is that normally there is no Ticker polling happening. It only actually starts polling when somebody needs the data. And so it's on an as needed basis. And so there you've got your data coming in. Now, there were a few things I just wanted to point out about how this was created. Let's go in and actually go to the editor. And I'm going to take a look at how this utilization panel was configured. First of all, the dashlet source was not dashboard. That's the default, which means that it would take whatever was being used as the context in the Explorer. That's not relevant here because this is actually a view-based dashboard. and ticker won't operate at the view level. So this is using a dashlet, and which dashlet is it using? It's using this one called port list, which is over here on the left. And so whichever entry, whichever row you select in that table becomes the context for this dashlet. This is going to be focused on a port, and I have added 2 new series in here for monitoring. If you take a look at the first one, I called it in, keeping the name short and sweet because I'd already called the in the title of this chart, I put utilization. So if I said in utilization, that would be a little superfluous. We've got the color defined, I left it default. And here, instead of the default, which is to take from a stream, which means data in the database, I chose ticker. Then it asked me to enter an OID. Now I could enter a numeric SNMP OID, although in this case, it understands how to compute utilization. And there are 2 special strings in here, in utilization and out utilization, which will cause it to pull in the traffic and then factor that into the line speed to get the percentage utilization. As it's percentage, I told it that the unit was going to be percentage, and that didn't need any further configuration to operate. Now, there is a subtlety when it comes to the faults. If I were to show you here, we're pulling that data in using a string to identify the OID, which is in or IF in M2 errors, so that's MIB2 errors. Incidentally, if you configure up a ticker screen, you'll be able to see these strings. I said the unit was going to be packets because this is going to be a packet rate, but this by default is actually going to give me an absolute packet count since that counter was last reset. Now that's not what I want to show. I want to be showing a difference between samples. If you look further down, there is an option which is normally turned off, and that is to show ticker rate. This will cause it to perform delta calculations between samples. In other words, what has changed between the previous sample and this one. You can then tell it to compute the output based upon either seconds, minutes, hours, or days. I wanted this on a per second basis, and I wanted the legend to be always visible, so that you can actually see the legend at the bottom of the chart. So those were the key things that I made the change on here, and that achieved that end result so that I was getting a fault rate in terms of packets per second rather than that absolute fault count, which frankly isn't an awful lot of use to many people. So that was the fundamental tricks, you might call them, that were used to create it. And at this point, back to you, Jordan.
No, I think that's great. I have to admit, this was one of those features that I think I'd been using Entuity for months. And somebody went, well, why don't you use the ticker? And I went, the what? That's great, right? So I think you could go a long time, being a regular user of Entuity and not even knowing that functionality is there or when you might want to use it. So I'm glad we got to show this today. And this is way easier, right? Especially from if I have a known set or whatever else. Well, and this could also be filtered since it's a view by location or by teams, right? So a lot of role-based access there, so that in a larger environment, I might have a lot more than 1,400 ports, and so that's really helpful. So I'll do a last call for any questions on the topics today. Hopefully this was helpful and spurs some creativity on what we, how you guys might use Entuity to engage with the business or leadership to tell the story of the infrastructure. I'm going to launch the final poll. This one's an easy one, I think, but really just what topics should we cover in the future, right? I said at the beginning, for us, we really want to make sure that these are, informative and helpful and live up to the moniker of Tech Talk, right? And aren't just regular demo. So go ahead and put those in, and maybe that'll help us as we're trying to pick the next ones. And so that it matters to you guys, right? That's a big thing for us. And I know that we appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. I know it's end of day for some, or right in the middle of the morning for others, and so it's always tough to find time on calendars. So really appreciate it that we have that. I don't know if everybody else can see this, but it's building a really nice word cloud on my side here, which is great. And things like that. So I don't think I have any other housekeeping items. Just double checking my notes here. And I don't think we've had any other questions come in, unless I missed them. I don't think so. With that, Pete, do you want to tell us about your water leak? No, I'm kidding. We can, I'll hang on till the end of kind of scheduled time, but if there's nothing else, have a great rest of your week, and we should see. Oh, here we go. Is there any way to copy dashlets within the dashboard? So Pete, I think you showed a little bit how to copy dashlets across dashboards, right? But can we dupe one so that it's maybe along the way for us?
You can do it in a fashion where you're leveraging more than one tab. So if you're modifying a dashboard, say you save the state of that dashboard, open it up in its saved state in another tab, and drag that same chart over into the edit version on the other tab. So yeah, and effectively you can do that.
Naturally, the easiest way to do that would be to duplicate the tab.
Yep.
Jared, these are recorded and they'll be posted on the Park Place Technologies website, usually in a couple of days. They edit out all my ums, and they've got to tighten up my figure so that I'm look camera ready, but otherwise they go up pretty fast. Well, thank you very much. It's always, the Zoom fatigue of being on camera, right? So, let's see if, as I look at this kind of word cloud, if anything stands out to me.
Jordan, you made a comment about, as JD was talking about, the ticker was being able to show sort of a look of multiple, we talk about multiple ports, large numbers of ports, but the ability to use a ticker in a dashboard that tells you about all your significant sites at once, not hundreds, but if you've got a handful of sites, just have one dashboard that launches a whole bunch of tickers in parallel to tell that story. That's something that is very doable as well.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting. So Google Map integration as a topic. I think that that could be fascinating, right? To go through kind of how to make sure Google Maps are set up right, and then also how to do the gosh, we could probably talk for an hour and a half just about that that whole dashlet, right? Of Google Maps versus topological views and Visio and everything else, right? That sounds like it could be interesting. Oh, and somebody, I do see water leak on there. So somebody would like an RCA deep dive tech talk on water leak. So maybe we can schedule that one out of cycle.
Well, I'm monitoring my water system in my house with Entuity, so I could tell I had a water leak ahead of time. So
Yeah, okay. Well, great. Integrations with Cisco. Yeah, there was a good question in the Q&A section about Cisco end-of-life data. And I know we've used that as one of our examples for the REST API Polar Tech Talk, right? Another one that I did point out is that Cisco has a OpenValn API that allows you to look up for a given device and firmware version, what are the known CVEs for it, and then also what's the recommended upgrade, right? So this tool's available from Cisco on the web as like a web browser, right? But you've got to like click, right? So with a reasonably complex network, it can be really time consuming. So they do have that as a REST API option that would be, I think, an interesting candidate for REST API to enrich the data that's there. All right, let me do one last check on the word cloud, kind of refresh. I do see some questioning around scripting and config management. I think config management could be a really interesting topic to go through just because it can get so very technical, right? So we'll that might be one to look at. But then some questions around storage. I know that's newer to the Entuity discussion, right? Might be worth bringing in somebody from that team to talk even a little bit about what we're doing and how that works, right? I think I got a friend on that development team that we could borrow. Oh, when I see SurePath's on there, I'd love to do SurePath. I think that's a underused piece, right? Especially when we're talking about troubleshooting, right? All right, well, let me double check the Q&A here. If there's anything new, no, nothing in the chat. So yeah, the recording will be posted shortly. And thanks everybody for the time today. And keep an eye out for an invite for a future tech talk, maybe on Pete's water leak. So thanks. Bye-bye.